Hello, everyone. We just wanted to acknowledge that Pastor Stuart Briscoe, Pete Briscoe's father, went home to be with the Lord on August 3rd, 2022, at the age of 91, and after this podcast was recorded. Stuart preached his first sermon at age 17 and continued preaching joyfully for 74 years. He was known as a great preacher who spoke with clarity. He loved the people he preached to, and he had a deep trust in the work of the Holy Spirit. In addition to preaching, Stuart was a Christian author and international speaker who left an incredible legacy. Today, we want to honor Pastor Stuart, who ran the race set before him with perseverance and faithfulness. October is National Clergy Appreciation Month, a time set aside to recognize the contributions, service, and kingdom impact of pastors, priests, reverends, ministers, and all other clergy members. We are so excited to have Pastor Pete Briscoe with us today as he shares insights as to why pastors can feel discouraged, alone, and even isolated. Pastor Pete also shares ways we can honor and express gratitude to our pastors and church leaders. Our hope is that we will all gain understanding from this podcast and will respond with authentic generosity and unconditional love. Welcome to Moving Mountains, a podcast where we get to celebrate together the wins that different churches and the church as a whole have experienced. I'm Pam Flannery, and each month I get the amazing opportunity to talk with church leaders from all over the country, hearing the innovative and creative ways they're reaching their communities through the struggles and the wins in their ministry. Our hope is that you'll leave each episode with fresh ideas for your ministry, as well as the tools to put that plan into action so that you can impact your community further. Let's move mountains. Hi, my name is Pam Flannery. I lead our customer communities at PushPay. Thank you for joining us today. I am thrilled to introduce our guest, Pete Briscoe. He's one of my favorite pastors. If you've never heard him preach, I highly recommend you check out his sermons on YouTube. Pete has pastored Brent Tree Bible Fellowship in North Dallas for 28 years after doing his graduate work at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He's married to Libby, who I absolutely love. Follow her on Facebook. She's wonderful. They have 3 adult children, and they now live in a motorhome driving across the beautiful parts of the country. Pastor Pete, welcome. It is such an honor to have you as our guest today. Please tell our listeners about yourself, your wonderful family, your parents, your ministry journey, and we'd also love to hear about that decision to travel the country in your motorhome. It's definitely a dream of my husband's. He talks about it often. I'm kind of getting buy-in. I just think, oh, it would be so wonderful. And then I'm like, I need to talk to Libby.
Oh, Pam, it's just a joy to be with you. I'm so glad we were able to work this out. It's so funny when you talk about the motorhome. When we tell people that, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, we sold our house, gave almost everything away, put what was left into storage. The day we bought the RV was the first night we'd ever spent in an RV. Like, we'd never done this before. And so we were completely green, and we packed it up and we headed towards the mountains, and we tell people this story and we get one of 2 responses. We either get, "That's my dream, you're living my dream," or I could never do that. It's just one extreme or the other. And then
Yeah.
sometimes it's a couple and one says, "Oh, that's my dream," and the other says, "Oh, we're never going to do that." And so it's been a lot of fun. We literally go and park our motorhome outside a national park somewhere, and we'll work during the day, and then in the evenings we'll drive into the park and see the animals and go on hikes. And I think in 2.5 years, we've been to 25 national parks around the country, and it's just been absolutely awesome. It's exactly what we needed after over 28 years of grinding and working all the time. It's been an incredible breath of fresh air for us. Yeah, so just, you asked me about a whole bunch of stuff there. I'll just give you a quick overview of my life a little bit. Libby's my family. Our 3 20-something kids are just the joy of our life. They're crazy, they're wacky, they're so much fun. And and we love anytime we can get with them. And yeah, we left full-time ministry 2.5 years ago. It felt abrupt to us and to everyone else. It was hard, but it was really necessary. As we go along, we can talk more about that if you like, but that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Well, you've pastored most of your adult life, and I know that you love preaching the word. It's so evident, and I know how much people love hearing you preach the word. You're just a great communicator. Pastoring is not just for teaching, though. There's some real struggles. There's isolation, burnout, balancing ministry and family life. Recent data collected from Barna shows that in 2021, nearly 2 in 5 pastors considered quitting full-time ministry. So with pastors' well-being on the line and many on the brink of burnout, 38% indicate that they've considered quitting full-time ministry within the past year. Why do you think these percentages are so high, and do you think they're accurate?
Yeah, it's hard for me to speak to the accuracy of the percentages. It wouldn't shock me if they're accurate. Candidly, I think they're probably on the low end from what I'm experiencing in my conversations with pastors kind of on the ground. Wow, why are these percentages so high? Well, if you think about the last 3 years, Pam, a pastor's job is generally somewhat stressful for reasons that I'll explain in just a minute. But you add on top of the general stress of the pastor's world, a pandemic, and it's not just a pandemic, it's masks. Are you going to wear them or are you going to not? And whatever decision you make, half the church is mad at you. There's like literally no way to win, right? And for a lot of pastors, it wasn't just the church that was mad at them or half the church, it was half the elder board or half the deacon board, right? Because they were evenly split too. And so there's all this kind of injected disunity that the pastors are having to try to figure out and how to sort through, finally figure out the mask thing. And then the vaccine thing does it all over again. And then in-person services, are we going to meet again or not? A lot of churches had to go online, and they've never done this before. I had one pastor send me a video of his sermon saying, Pete, how can I do this a little better? And he had put his iPhone literally on the podium, and so it was looking straight up from underneath his face. And that's like, he hasn't been trained how to do this. He went to seminary to learn theology. He didn't go to seminary to learn technology, right? And so all these small churches are having to figure this stuff out, and these pastors on top of all of it are having to become tech guys. There's all these people struggling with illnesses in the church. Obviously the pandemic hit a lot of churches very hard. I had one friend who buried 23 of his friends during the pandemic. And so as a pastor, you're losing friends, but you're also having to do their memorial services just one after another after another. It was a challenge to stay connected to the body. There's disunity in the boardroom, all that stuff. And then on top of that, there's these cultural conversations that are happening around racism and politics and all that stuff that's injected into the church. And once again, trying to juggle that and figure out how to navigate those things. And this is all on top of the normal pressure, work hours, always being on call, family stress, financial stress. 67% of pastors in America, these numbers are a little old, so I don't know if these numbers are that accurate, but it gives you a feel. 67% of pastors in America are bivocational, which means they have to work at Walmart on top of their job at church to pay the bills, right? I mean, they've got to go find a second job just to pay the bills. Almost 7 out of 10 pastors live that way. And so on top of all that stuff, you've got a second job you've got to go to. There's family stress. There's kids that don't like being in the fishbowl. There's personal wounding that the pastor's never dealt with. And during seasons like this, personal wounding starts to pop up all over the place. And so it's not hard to imagine a pastor waking up one morning and just saying, why am I doing this? Like, literally, what's the point? I do all this. I'm getting paid $26,000 a year. I can't even make ends meet. And that's why 38% are saying, you know what, I'm going to go sell insurance. At least then I'll be able to support my family. There's a big part of me that doesn't blame them. It's just really, really hard.
It breaks my heart. I'm very, very excited about what you and Libby are offering to people right now in that healing journey. And so we're going to talk about that. But I'd like to, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to share, were there personal struggles that you and Libby, so many times we hear about pastors and stuff, but I also believe that, like you said, kids living in a fishbowl, pastors' wives that are working 2 and 3 jobs to
Mhm.
make ends meet. Why do we underpay pastors? Why do we under appreciate them? And you said something like being on call all the time. Is that an expectation that all pastors need to be on
Mhm.
call all the time? Why can't they shut it off at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever?
So the average church size in America is 60 people, 60, right? So if you walked into the average church this Sunday, there would be 60 people there. 60 people is probably just enough to support a pastor at $25,000 a year. Why do churches underpay pastors? Most of it, it's just numbers. It's just what they're able to raise to support the pastor. So I don't begrudge those churches. I understand there's only so much, to give, and so that's part of the problem. I think the on-call thing is, if I'm a member of a church and I've never called my pastor after hours, and I've been in the church for 10 or 15 years, and my son has a car accident and I'm at the hospital and I'm scared, I'm going to call my pastor because I need comfort. And the fact that it's 9 o'clock on a Friday night, I couldn't time when my son had the car accident. That's not fair. So I have an expectation that my pastor will pick up the phone and minister to me in my time of crisis. And so I understand where the expectations come from. The problem is, as churches get a little bit bigger than 60 and there's still only one pastor, all of a sudden those calls are coming all the time for the pastor. And so, he's trying to have a family dinner and the phone rings and, the kids are like, oh, there goes dad again. So
Mm,
that's the challenge. I don't think people are trying to hurt their pastors or abuse their pastors at all. I think churches love their pastors and really care about them. I think a lot of churches are unaware that their pastors are struggling because the pastors kind of suck it up and they tough it out, and they don't really convey to the leadership of the church that they need a raise or whatever. It's hard. No one goes into ministry for money. Okay, I say that. I think some people probably do, but if they do, they're sorely disappointed. It's not what it's for. And so people that are in ministry really are there just to serve and to love people, and they feel self-conscious about talking about money, and so they don't ever ask for help, and you can
mhm.
see how it happens. It's not hard to imagine how it happens.
Yeah, I think just coming alongside your pastor and saying something like, "Hey, this week I'd like to, if you get any calls, send them my way and I'll go do hospital visits." Or,
Mm.
do you think that's acceptable? Do you think that a congregation would be fine with that? I mean, I wouldn't care because I mean, we all have the same Holy Spirit living inside of us. But I do think that there is this extra pressure that I want my pastor there.
A pastor is essentially an equipper, right? That's what a pastor is supposed to do, equip the saints for works of service, right? And so as churches grow, the idea would be that the pastor would train 2 or 3 people that have the gifts of compassion and caring, and would train them how to go and sit with people in hospitals, and that's exactly how churches should work. But you're exactly right. Uh, People in their one moment of crisis, they want the pastor, and
Yeah.
that's just, you have to train the church, and that's the hard part because people get disappointed in you, and pastors are generally pleasers and they don't want anyone disappointed with them, and so they say yes to things that they probably should be saying no to. And one of my professors in seminary said that every time you say yes to something outside your normal job description, you're saying no to your family. And that really plays out. That's really true. And pastors do that all the time. And they feel like they're serving their people. And at the end of the day, it's them and their family that suffers.
It's so true. So, what are some of those struggles that you and Libby had personally? And you mentioned that you left after pastoring pretty abruptly. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. I'm not sharing a whole lot of details. One of the things that I've learned in the last 3 years is that I'm a human being and I'm a person, and that I'm actually not owned by other people. And for pastors, there's this feeling like you belong to the community, you belong to the church, that people have a right to know things about you. that other people would consider personal. And there's kind of a dance there. You've got to kind of navigate that. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, I became quite isolated. Our church grew quite large. I had a great staff, an incredible team. They were doing a lot of the work that I used to do. And so I was able to focus on my preaching and leadership, which were my two giftings, primary giftings. I had the quote unquote dream job. I was not one of those people whose wife had to go work two jobs. I was taken care of financially, and I got isolated. I got alone. I would go through cycles where I was in a really good place, and then I would start to go into a dark place, and I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't have a counselor. I was alone and isolated, and I didn't talk to my friends about it. And those cycles over the years, as the church grew and as the pressure grew, those cycles got deeper and deeper and more frequent. And shortly before we left the ministry, I had another cycle, and it was the deepest and the hardest and the darkest that I'd had. And as Libby and I talked through it, and as I took a leave of absence to go and get some help and to start to sort through it a little bit, I just really came to the conclusion that I could not stay in that role and be healthy long term. And so I chose to be a healthy person over being a megachurch pastor. And I was an incredibly hard choice. And I had a 90-day leave of absence. So Libby and I had been processing for 90 days. But for the church, it felt very abrupt because I came back from my leave of absence, and the church was like, "Yay, Pete and Libby are back." And then we stood up and said we're leaving, and I'm sure it was, I know for a fact it was abrupt for them and hard. So, but yeah, the isolation is a real deal. In fact, I saw a recent study on why pastors were leaving, and that the top two reasons pastors are leaving. One was just the stress of the job, and that's the list I just shared with you earlier. And the second is just isolation. And pastors are very, very lonely people, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
In addition to teaching, we know pastors and ministry leaders give of their time and resources consistently. At PushPay, our founders believe these selfless leaders deserved great tools to support their ministry and make it easier to pastor. PushPay tools organize giving solution, church apps, reporting and analytics, and much more all in one place. Now pastors can leave the stress of managing different apps and searching for email threads behind, while enjoying an easy-to-use church management solution so they can focus on the heart of their ministry and their community. If you'd like to hear how we can help give you back more of your valuable time and help make ministry more effective, visit us at pushpay.com. You know, I have a lot of pastor friends, and a lot of them shared that with me years ago. Probably over the last 10 years, I've heard that. And the first time someone shared that with me, I was actually shocked, because I thought, how can you be isolated, especially as a mega church pastor, because you have all these friends and everybody. And then I went immediately to something that was spoken to me when in my early 20s. Leadership is lonely. And when I heard that, I thought, but it doesn't have to be. What causes loneliness within pastors? Is it because pastors feel like they just can't be themselves because they're going to be judged? What are some of those factors that contribute to loneliness?
I think part of it is an unhealthy perspective of the role on the pastor's part. So what I mean by that is we convince ourselves that we have to be kind of the point person out front that's showing everyone how to do this Christian life thing, right? And so when inevitably, not if, but when inevitably something comes up in our life that isn't really in line with that, we find ourselves like hiding it and struggling. And so we don't want anyone to know. And so we start to keep people at an arm's length, because if they ask the wrong questions, it's how everyone gets isolated. But when you're in leadership in a church, there's I was taught, in seminary, not by professors, but just in conversation, never be close friends with someone in your church, because as their pastor, that really undercuts your pastoral authority and relationship with them. So there's this people are actually taught, don't find your friends in your church. And so then they try to find friends outside the church. And a lot of times they'll do that with other pastors in the area. And that's one place where pastors can really connect. You can sit down with 3 or 4 other pastors and you don't have to explain what's going on. Everyone knows what's going on, and you can just talk and you can share your heart. But if you think about it, there are certain things that a person can do that would be sinful, that would be out of bounds, that if you were a business executive, or if you were a school teacher and you did those things, that would be bad, and you would need to sort through it, and you might need to have some conversations with people, whatever. But you wouldn't get fired for it, right? I mean, it wouldn't even come up in your place of employment, because if you're starting to drink a little too much, they're not going to fire you for that. They're going to want you to get help, but they're not going to fire you for that, right? But those same things will get a pastor fired. And so you find yourself looking at some of those things, and maybe you step into something that you shouldn't be stepping into. And the healthy thing to do is to go and tell someone and to say, I need help, and to get some help, and to stop doing it and to move forward, right? That's the healthy thing. A lot of times pastors might do that and they find themselves out of a job, and now they're not even getting the help that they need. And so it's really tricky. It's hard, because there is a degree to which there's certain standards that are obviously necessary for pastors to carry, but then they're humans too, and no one's perfect. You ask the people, when was the last time you had a sinless day? And most people are going to say, oh, it's probably not happened for quite a while, right? Pastors are people. Like, they haven't had a sinless day for a long time either. But the problem is, it can cost them their livelihood and their future. But those are some of the factors that pastors are dealing with.
No, I'm glad you shared that, because it's helpful for all of us to understand. Well, in addition, you are now in a new season that I'm really excited about. You're coaching pastors and leaders, and I'm sure that part of that coaching, you're including some of this in getting healthy. Tell us a little bit about that before we go into your online course. Thank you that you've given me the opportunity to go through that.
Yeah.
Thing to me, but I do want to hear that transition of going from a pastor of a mega church to now helping pastors and leaders, business leaders. Tell us a little bit about that.
I coach leaders now, either leaders in nonprofit areas like churches or other non-for-profits, and marketplace leaders. They're usually C-suite leaders or business owners. And a lot of them have figured out the science of achievement, but they struggle with the art of fulfillment, right? So they've figured out the blocking and tackling of building a business empire of some sort. So they're doing great as people look at them from the outside, but they're dying inside and they're struggling. And so I come alongside them and I help them sort through what's really going on inside. What are the messages that are driving them? How do we start to change some of those neural pathways? How do we start to navigate a new way of living? And family issues and future planning for my pastor clients. A lot of them really don't have any plan for the future, and they get into their 50s and they start going, uh-oh, I'm going to be done soon. What do I do next? And so I help people sort through that and put together some plans and help them navigate that. So I really think that pastors are people and that they need help being people. And so I come alongside them and help them be people. And the same for business leaders. A lot of people don't perceive them as people, and they are. They have fears and struggles and concerns like everyone else. And so the way I say it is, I used to stand in front of thousands. Now I sit across from one. It goes obviously much deeper, and we're able to get into the nooks and crannies of life and deal with real stuff. And I'm so proud of my clients. I'm just so proud of them. They work so hard and they are so eager to grow, and I see their lives changing. It's a joy. It really is.
And, sitting across from that one has a ripple effect of thousands for each of those ones. So how rewarding is that? And nothing better than seeing people get healed. I love that you just mentioned the neural pathways, because I got saved when I was in my early 20s. I didn't grow up in the church, but everything then became spiritual in the church. And I never heard about physical a little bit, but never anything about the brain. And I have been studying the brain now for the last couple of years, Dr. Carolyn Leaf and others, that I'm just so appreciated the science behind this over the past 30 years, and how science and scripture just, it's one and the same. And it's so beautiful understanding so much and going, this is why I think church suffers and individuals suffer, because we are not learning about the brain and this beautiful organ that God has created and the power of that. So you might share a little bit more on that?
The fact of the matter is, we grow up in environments and we grow up in families, and things happen to us and trauma happens to us, and we make decisions, and all this is a soup that kind of creates patterns in our lives that we're not even aware of a lot of times. And the brain science, simply stated, is we kind of dig troughs in our brain. They're neural pathways that they become our default settings, and we have to recognize what those are if we want to break some of those patterns. And there's simple processes to help do that. It's not rocket science. It's brain science, but it's not rocket science. So a lot of it fits under the biblical principle of taking your thoughts captive. So much of it is about our thought life. And, we read that passage, take your thought captive to Christ, and we're like, okay, I'm going to do that. It's like, how do you do that? Right. And that's a lot of what I teach my clients, is how to figure out what thoughts are driving their feelings and their behavior and their results, and then helping them sort through those thoughts and come up with different ones that take them to different places. So it's fascinating. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's so good, so rich. So in addition to coaching pastors and leaders, you've created this incredible online resource for pastors. And one of the reasons we wanted you to share is because of it being Clergy or Pastor Appreciation Month. You share so much wisdom and practical application with engaging content. I actually felt connected with you personally going through the course, the way you use media to enhance your lessons. It was just wonderful. Everything is so thoughtful in this curriculum, I guess you would call it. And I personally believe that whether you're someone at a place in your life where you feel called to pastor, or maybe you've pastored for decades, I believe this information is vital and such a wonderful resource. What do you hope that pastors and leaders will gain from this? And why is it different than seminary?
It's different from seminary because it's practical.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So it's a communication theory course applied to teaching the Bible. And so in seminary, we learned how to parse Greek verbs and how to exegete a text, which is incredibly important. But this course teaches us how to share what we've learned in a compelling way. Communication is both art and science. I tackle both in the course. And I'm realizing as people are buying the course and using it, I'm realizing that it's not simply pastors. I was talking to a pastor today. He's buying courses for his youth pastors and for two of his elders that teach periodically. And it's for anyone who stands up in front of people and teaches, and they want to teach in a compelling way. I feel like it's very accessible for anyone, but it's not simplistic. It's actually pretty complex communication theory as you go through the course, but I think I've presented it in a way that's accessible for people.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I thought, this is really complex. How am I going to ever memorize all this? But as you go through it, it just kind of naturally, you build one lesson on the next. One of my favorite parts of the course is when you give examples of telling intriguing stories that engage listeners, and you encourage pastors to make a consecrated effort to build tension, and then take people to that biblical text to relieve the in the room. That was brilliant. I love that. And I love that you chose the Budweiser commercial as an example. So beer is my least favorite drink, but yet Budweiser commercials are my absolute favorite because they invoke all the feels for me,
Yep.
And my husband cries, he just does, or he'll clap. He clapped when he watched that one, but it's this adorable puppy and these Clydesdales. And I just thought, this is brilliant. And you just give a lot of those examples throughout the course. When pastors share stories, they need to create intrigue and engage their listeners in the same way. And I've said it before, you're a master storyteller. Your sermons have kept me on the edge. Like, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to hear what he's going to say. Even your personal stories, they naturally flow rather than, oh, that was awkward. Because I've heard sermons like that where I'm like, and sometimes unintentionally, pastors can kind of put down their family and not even realize they just did that. And so you do it in a great way. You use a classical narrative arc. Would you share a little bit about that and what that looks like?
So now we're getting into some of the science of communication, right? So the narrative arc is something that most of us don't realize is happening in almost every good movie we've ever been to, every great book we've ever read. It's always behind story. And if you can picture just kind of a plane going to a mountain and then coming down into another plane again, on the left side, you're going up the mountain and you're starting with setting and characters. You're just setting the stage for the story, and we meet the characters there. And then you introduce tension and conflict. Something goes wrong in one of the lives of one of the people in the story. A crisis is experienced. And we find ourselves starting to feel angst and wondering, how is this problem going to be solved? And then we get to the climax at the top of the mountain. And this is where the tension builds into discomfort. And there's a strong desire to have the problem resolved. Like, we are squirming now. We want this fixed, right? And then there's resolution. And resolution, James Bond stops the bomb. Robert Redford's character finds love. The Von Trapps hike over the mountains. Frodo throws the ring into the cauldron of Mordor. The resolution happens. And then after the resolution, there's the plane on the other side of the mountain. And that's the new normal. And now we see the characters living in a new and better way, usually. And this is the classic narrative arc. And what I argue for in my preaching course is that we need to use this arc effectively, not only when we're telling an illustration within our sermon, but that this is actually the structure for a really compelling sermon. The best sermons are stories. And so the idea of creating tension at the beginning of your sermon is something that I teach all my clients. It's not an original idea with me. I learned it from Andy Stanley, and it's an incredibly important part. It's why people decide to listen to you for the rest of the sermon, right? And so, yes, in the course, I teach people how to go about doing that. It's incredibly important.
The course is insightful, and you use also memorable acronyms in a way that's brilliant. And also your notes. I love how you've done your notes. So can you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's simple and yet so profound. And I love that notebook, by the way, that you mentioned in your course. I'm going to get one of those.
Yeah. So a lot of people struggle with their notes, and they either feel like they're supposed to go without notes, it's absolutely terrifying. I've done it 2 or 3 times in my life. I don't recommend it. You don't need to introduce more stress into a stressful situation than is necessary. But I've also seen people take manuscripts into the pulpit and just read them, and there's nothing more boring than sitting and listening to someone read something. And so there's a note system that I've created that helps people maximize eye contact while they keep the information that they want to make sure they communicate in front of them. And it requires a restructuring of sermons, which there's a lot in this that people are going to have to decide if they want to do or not. I can practically guarantee if they'll try these things, it'll make their sermons better. I do it with all my clients. All their sermons are better. I did it personally over the years. All my sermons got better. And so it's a simple system that I feel like it would take too long for me to start to explain now. But in the course, I'm able to show it on the screen, and you're able to interact with it in a kind of cool way. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
Oh, you are. Yeah, you are. So in October 9th this year of 2022 is clergy appreciation or pastor appreciation. And so it would be a wonderful gift for pastors, a perfect gift. And, you and I talked about this. How do you say to your pastor, here, I got you this gift on how to be a great communicator or preacher, but it can be done in a way that's really, it's an encouragement, I think, to pastors. So share how people can do that. Because I really do hope that our listeners, whether you're a pastor, I hope you buy it for yourself or your church buys it for you. But if you're not a pastor, really consider buying this for your pastor as a gift, because I promise you, they're going to love the material. It's so great. So how would you present that for people to give to their pastor, and where can they find this?
Thanks, Pam, for your endorsement. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And what I would encourage people to do if they're thinking of this is just have a conversation with the pastor and just say, hey, I heard about this course. I think you're fabulous. I'm not offering this because I think you need help. I love your preaching,
Yeah.
but I thought it might be fun for you or interesting for you, and I'd love to buy it for you if you'd like me to. And I really strongly encourage people to have that conversation. That pastors may not be interested, and that's totally fine. So after that conversation, all you have to do is go to my webpage, which is Pete Briscoe. So my name, PETEBRISCOE. There's an E on the end of Briscoe.com. And that's my landing page. And what I would encourage people to do if they're buying it for someone else is when it asks for the email, put your pastor's email in there, and then just go ahead and pay for the course. And then the pastor will get an email saying, here's your course. It's simply that simple. And I would love for people to do that. I think it's a great way to appreciate your pastors.
Mm-hmm. And you do talk about that one thing in your course too, which I really appreciated that. So I feel like I want to throw out all these little nuggets so that it will encourage people to get, and even if you, like, I was thinking about school teachers, it would be perfect for them. Anyone, like you said, anyone who stands up to communicate in front of others. And even if you don't, it's a course I think everyone should get. Personally, I'm sorry, but I do. It's great.
It's funny you say that, Pam, because I do communications coaching with marketplace leaders too. I basically teach the same thing. I adapt a couple of the words and just change it just a little bit, but it's literally just communication theory. It's how to be a better communicator. And then I apply it to preaching. So yes, I agree. Anyone who wants to communicate better could learn from it.
Well, we want to be better communicators, even in our personal one-on-one relationships, in our marriages, with our children, with our friends. I want to always grow in communication, because we can hurt with our words or we can build up with our words. And so I've learned
Yes,
the
for
hard
sure.
way that I've done both in my life. So, like I said, you do talk about that one thing. And so is there one thing that you would like to leave with our listeners before we close?
We've been talking a lot about pastors, and so I know not all your listeners are pastors, but for those that are, I think what I would share is remember you're a human being, and you're a human being first. You're a person. And when I was in therapy, my therapist asked me a question, and I answered the question, and she looked at me and she said, "Nice answer, Pastor Pete. I wonder what real Pete thinks." And I took a step back because what she was saying was that there's kind of this Pastor Pete persona that I was completely unaware of. And a persona is a heavy thing to carry around. And there's a lot about the pastoral world that almost forces us to create a persona. We're sharing about our personal life in our sermons, but we're not sharing everything. It wouldn't be appropriate to share everything in our personal life in our sermons. So we're already kind of picking and choosing what people see about us, and that creates a persona, right? And so I want to encourage pastors to do the work that they need to do to deal with their personal stuff, because they're humans and their personal stuff is impacting them. And we all have personal stuff. There's no shame in dealing with our personal stuff. And so if you need to get some help, go get some help and talk to someone. And if there's no one you can talk to, go pay someone to listen to you. I mean, that's what therapists do. They listen, you pay them, and then they listen to you. And we need to have at least one person that we can talk to. And so that would be my one thing at the end.
It's good. So good. I wish we had like 5 more hours, because I know that you have so much wisdom over the years that you could share. Hopefully people will connect with you. And I do not think that saying that you need a therapist or you need to talk to someone is a weakness. It's actually a strength to be able to put our pride aside and say, I need help. I need a third person. I
Absolutely.
need someone to speak into my life and to point out these blind spots. We don't see them, and we all have them.
Yep.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Pastor Pete. I really
You
appreciate
bet.
it. I know how full your schedule is and how full Libby's schedule is. And so I give my love to her, and thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for caring for pastors and leaders and wanting to see them be healthy and living the life God has called them to live.
It's my joy, and it's been so fun talking with you, Pam. Thanks for inviting me. And can I just mention my ministry webpage? I
Yes.
talked about petebriscoe.com. That's where my preaching course is. But petebriscoe.org is my ministry page, and there's tons of video sermons, and there's an opportunity there to sign up for a daily devotional where I just talk about Jesus and his grace every day. It shows up in your inbox. It's free, and there's blog posts there and other things. So petebriscoe.org is a free resource for people if they're looking for encouragement. So I just want to mention that too.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I subscribe to that and I get it every day. And I usually start my morning with that devotional, and I really like it. And I love that I feel your human side, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just feel like you're speaking your heart, and people will just have to subscribe so they can see what I mean. But I appreciate I don't know, I feel like it's a wholeness that you bring to the body of Christ. There's a lot of wisdom in knowing who we are in Christ, rather than, like you said, this persona that we want to carry around. Or I hate to say it, but sometimes we can live a life that's pretty fake because we're trying to put on this is who I am to people. And we just have got to get raw and get real and get healthy. And those devotionals are really a great step in that direction.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for sharing today, Pastor Pete. Bless you and your ministry, and thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Pam, for having me.
This has been Pushpay's Moving Mountain podcast, real talk from church leaders about overcoming challenges and growing their ministries. If you'd like to learn more about church staff or any of the features mentioned in our podcast, visit us at pushpay.com. Make sure you subscribe so that you can get notified whenever a new episode comes out. You don't want to miss out on any of these great conversations with amazing people. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.